And I think the history is fascinating. But for Roche to become what they today are, they have been able to leave a lot of the history back. Most pharmaceutical companies could talk about personalized medicine but didn't make the commitment to own it. But Roche owned diagnostics. To truly pair drug plus diagnostic, you must coordinate regulatory strategy, trial design and commercial deployment. If a pure play pharma company wanted to do this, they would need to partner or acquire diagnostics capability from somewhere. That is expensive and culturally difficult. Roche could execute it internally.
Welcome to Category Leaders, where we dive deep on companies that are best in the world, based in Europe. We want to understand their story, their playbook, and their powers. Martti and I believe in studying durable companies generating tens of billions in revenue. These are timeless lessons and timely lessons for today's builders and investors. I'm Colin Brown.
And I'm Martti Wallin, and we are your hosts today with this episode of Roche. And so please, listeners, join us for when we tell a story about this fascinating company that starts its life in the small Swiss town of Basel, right next to the German border, but arguably becomes one of the most important companies in the world. Every company we study here in Category Leaders is impactful at a global scale as a category leader, but we have covered impact on the life and health and so many people, yet is understood by so few. I mean, you can see the name of Roche in the package of pills you buy, but very few actually have dug any deeper. Today, Swiss company Roche is more than 55 billion in revenue, operating in more than 100 countries, employing over 100,000 people, and almost completely invisible to the public eye.
Absolutely. And if listeners caught our previous episode on EssilorLuxottica, we kind of don't mean invisible in that sense. EssilorLuxottica is pretty much an invisible, vertically integrated monopoly that owns some of the biggest brands in the world. So check out that episode. Kind of what we mean here is that effectively this company, people know the packaging and they know the brand, and when you ask them, and we do a ton of research here, we talk to competitors, former employees, current employees, but when you ask Joe Public, and what does this company do, the response are very hand wavy, right? It's kind of like drugs, question mark, tests, kind of. And when actually you push the people, and I'm quite a pushy person, you generally just get blank stares. And I have this hilarious one. I've been doing this for a month. I'm like, where does the company based? And they're all like, France? Because they're kind of like, it's a French-ish name, right? So listeners, as I said, we don't just ask Joe Public. We do a lot of research for each of these episodes. It takes Martti and I a lot of time to tell these stories. And we try and gather as much information as possible so that these episodes really inform you and help you understand the world as it's changing and moving forward.
Now, I've heard many people ask that, why do you do these episodes? What is your objective? And of course, we try to see this from a founder, from an entrepreneur and investor point of view. And the bar we have set ourselves is that we want a senior manager or a board member of the covered company to recommend the episode with a line, if you want to really understand my company, then listen to this podcast. I mean, that's the recommendation we'd like to hear. So please give us feedback so we can keep raising the bar and create timeless and timely content on these durable and amazing companies. And in Roche, we have a rare pharmaceutical company that has repeatedly reallocated capital early into the next scientific paradigm and used family governance to survive long enough for those bets to pay off. So Colin, this is a long and winding story, one successful capital allocator. How do we want to structure this time?
Yeah, and I do, listeners, just pick up on the words Martti just used there. This is a repeat capital allocator. right? So each time their business is about to fail, like it's a hero's journey for a company, they successfully reallocate the capital to the next engine. And I think that's fascinating. So I think we can separate this company into like 5 acts. And I think, we're going to talk about the 1890s first act, which is like a Swiss firm, right? Building with no regulation, basically kind of 1890s to just after World War One, 1919. I think that's Act One, and they're born global. I think Act Two represents their first really strong economic engine. That's the vitamin engine, right? That's Act Two. That'll take us into World War Two territory, 1920s, 1945. Act Three, I think, where we move from vitamins to Valium. That's the next engine, right? I'm not foreshadowing too much. There's no spoilers here. This is 1950s to the 1970s. It's all history. So I think this is where Roche really moves from kind of and starts to develop what's called a blockbuster type drug. So we move from vitamins to Valium in the 1950s, 1970s. That'll be our Act 3. Act 4 is where we start to talk about biotech, right? So this is where we move from Valium and we focus on Genentech and Chugai, who are their research engines. We talk about oncology and we talk about the rise of diagnostics. That'll be Act 4. And then bringing it to the present, so 2002 to now, I think we very much focus on precision medicine, independence, because there's a hostile takeover story here as well, and effectively how they have built these growth engines for the future. And again, we really want our episodes to be relevant 5 years from now. So effectively, we try not to suffer from a kind of recency bias, and we really focus on how this is going to help you as a founder and investor today. So plenty of sidebars, including China, COVID, and a bunch of other stuff. But I think that 5 act structure plus our analysis, that'll see us home.
Yeah, so 100% this is an interesting company and it touches so many lives and there are so many ways where this could have been very different story. I mean, we have a couple of world wars in between and huge disruptions of the entire marketplace. And I mean, of course, I have an engineering background and Roche, it sounds like an engineering background, but instead of engineers, you have pharmaceutical professors and you have doctors. But they are equally passionate about medicine as the engineers are of technology. And one of the things when I was reading the excellent first 100 years book of Roche, that I actually have my own copy here, was that they were actually founding the founder Fritz Hoffmann was already basing the company on the medicine of founder of medicine Hippocrates and the do no harm oath that has really proven to be very sustained ideology in the field of medicine. And in Hippocrates' writings, the Hippocratic corpus covered a lot of more than that. They emphasized the careful case of recording, prognosis, and ethical practice. So if I try to paraphrase the essence of what was said, was that it is far more important to know what person the disease has than what disease the person has. So this is a very deep meaning. I hope you will keep that in mind when you go through the story. And let's see what happens. We get to the Act 1.
Absolutely. I think that's a great seed to plant. That, I think, capital reallocator and that kind of what person type versus what the disease, I think is an excellent framing. Okay, Act 1. Born global, born small. So let me set the scene. For most of human history, medicine did not cure disease. It just simply named it. If you lived in the 17th and you developed a fever, a cough, a wasting illness, your physician could describe what was happening. But he, and let's just be clear, in the 1750s it was very likely to be a he, could not identify the mechanism. Disease was visible at the surface level. It was something you observed in symptoms, not something you understood at a molecular level. And this distinction matters because when medicine is about naming symptoms, The tools that you build are very different from when medicine is about correcting chemistry. So, before the late 19th century, there were no molecules in medicine. There were no pathogens in a modern sense. There's no biochemical pathways. All of that is going to come in Act 4 and Act 5 of this story. But there were patterns, and there were remedies, and there were botanicals, and there were sometimes minerals. But this all starts to change because in the late 1800s, it's not that new drugs appear, it's like intellectual foundation shifts. We talk about the germ theory if you look at our Zeiss episode. Diseases start to become chemical. Microscopes get invented. Once you accept that the premise that illness is a malfunction of chemistry rather than a curse or an act of God, right, or an imbalance of humors or a mysterious force, then the entire industrial project of medicine begins. And this is the world that Roche is born into.
I mean, the other way to say this, I guess, is that even with modern medicine, we have found an amazing amount of ways how to help people heal and correct the problems that humans have. But everything is, even today, is based on the self-healing properties of the human body. And of course, when we go to the beginning of Roche and the late 1800s, there was very little we could do. So essentially, the role of the doctor was to try to alleviate the pain and help the human body to heal itself. Even today, that fundamental element is there, even if, of course, the amount of things that we can do for a human body, the array of different tools and processes is massive, but still the healing is in the body itself. And what's interesting is that many category leaders that we have covered so far, our stories start from the 1800s or earlier. And once again, we go there. Zeiss, Essilor, or any other, we are always starting from the same time. And there has to be some common denominator that we are probably touching here as well. Anyway, in the late 1800s, Europe was in transition. Cities were industrializing very rapidly, and urban populations were exploding. Tuberculosis was endemic. Infectious disease dominated mortality statistics. Life expectancy in Switzerland hovers barely above 40 years. And I mean, not saying that Switzerland was any worse than most of the other countries in Europe. That was just the name of the game in those years. But at the same time, chemistry was becoming the most advanced scientific discipline in the world. Germany had built an industrial chemical empire, synthetic dyes, originally developed for textiles, and they were revealing that small chemical modifications can produce dramatically different biological effects. The boundary between laboratory discovery and industrial production was collapsing. And in this very small and modest city, right on the other side of the Rhine River, the chemical revolution was quietly taking root. Basel is not a capital, it's not Berlin or Paris, but it had two crucial advantages. A strong tradition of chemical manufacturing. Even today, chemical industry is very critical for the city of Basel. And they had political neutrality. And those two traits will matter enormously in the turbulent century to come. Because the 20th century will convulse Europe, and companies rooted in neutrality and chemistry will survive in ways others cannot.
Yeah, I think Marty will cover this later. There's got to be a reason why we're always starting in the 1800s, right? No, it's only Airbus and it's only Airbus that we cover and ASML that started in the 1970s, 1980s. Everybody else is in the 1800s. Okay, so in 1894, our first protagonist that we're introducing, a man named Fritz Hoffmann, decides to found a company. Such a simple statement. Okay, now let's just be clear, guys. He's not trying to cure all diseases. He is not building a pharmaceutical engine. What he sees is just really simple, and it's more radical. Because at that time in the 80s, most medicines are still compounded by pharmacies. They are mixed by hand. It is variable in quality. It is inconsistent in dosage. if two patients buy the same treatment in two different cities, actually, I would argue if two patients buy the same treatment in the same pharmacy on the same day by different people, they're getting different products, right? This is handcrafted, hand mixed medicine. Hoffman believes that medicine should be standardized, right? That's the thing that he wants to bring to the world. He thinks it should be manufactured, branded, produced at scale with consistent purity. All ideas that seem common sense today, but in 1894, this is not happening, right? Okay, so seems obvious now, then it's transformative. So it doesn't start particularly well, right? So he basically gets together with an in-house chemist, a guy called Max Carl Traub, and they take over a small factory. Max is working at that factory, and it's kind of a druggist. It's Boney, Hollinger, and Clough. And following a couple of difficult years, Max leaves the business, yeah, and basically Fritz Hoffmann La Roche Company, or Hoffmann La Roche Company, is entered into the commercial register in 1896. So we have this take over a small business, work with the in-house employee. After 2 years, it's not working. He leaves, and you are the sole proprietor of this small drug factory type entity. Now, I just said Hoffmann La Roche Company. I didn't say Hoffman Company. I said Hoffmann La Roche. And the name is important because in the intervening years between 1894 and 1896, when they register the company, he gets married. Okay, and he gets married to Adele Roche, and she comes from another prominent Swiss family. Hoffman is not poor. He is kind of a son of a merchant. He's traveled around the world at this stage, mainly in Europe, working in different businesses. And his wife comes from money too. So this is two kind of merchant Swiss families coming together. And the brand comes from that kind of coming. It takes her name as his. And that structure, that little family structure there, that shapes everything that follows.
Yeah, and just to remind where we are talking about events 130 years ago. So we didn't have antibiotics, we didn't have vaccines in the modern sense. We were essentially talking about extracts, treatments that were trying to treat symptoms rather than curing the diseases themselves. I mean, we are only one step forward from snake oil. I mean, essentially what these people were doing, they were trying to find these extracts from the nature, from the plants, from animals that will have healing capability. I mean, that's where it started. And clearly, when we talk about Roche, the mindset from the very beginning that this cannot be really this uncontrolled process. It has to be industrialized. It has to be standardized. It has to have quality. And quality was really very high on the agenda when we go also forward. Anyway, there were many diseases that you couldn't cure, but you were able to treat the suffering, to help at least a little bit. It is very important to understand here that Roche was not curing diseases. They were trying to industrialize reliable production of the ointments and the extracts that were available and known to have some beneficial effects. And as the scientific frontier moves, the medicine evolves from symptom management to microbial targeting, hormonal regulation, genetic intervention. There's really a long storyline that goes there. But it was not always easy. It was not flawless, but consistently aligned with the direction medicine was heading.
Yeah, and again, I think this is really important. This is the story of a company, but it's also the story of how medicine moves up the stack. It is actually the story of modern medicine, and this is what I'm reflecting on when we're doing the research. We start by treating symptoms, then we start treating infections, then we start treating organs, then cells, and then genes. And at each stage, go back to that capital reallocation, Roche repositions itself. And so the question we'll keep returning to throughout this episode, was this company and these founding team, these individuals, were they visionary? Or were they actually structurally aligned to how medicine was moving? Were they just in the right place at the right time and did the right things? Now, all of that is a bunch of rights. It's not easy to do any of those. But it's really interesting that, again, Roche's story is the story of modern medicine as well. So, is it because sometimes the greatest companies are not those that see the future, but they're those that are on the wave with the right shaped surfboard ready to go? And we saw this with ASML because they were born shortly around the same time as TSMC, right? So their working relationship with TMC and ARM and NVIDIA and Samsung shapes their trajectory. And I'm curious, Martti, to see if Roche's story evolves in the same way. Like, who are their journey fellows along the route? So, but before we get too carried away with the ascent of modern medicine, let's make sure we're suitably anchored, right? We've explained that we're in Switzerland. It's the 1890s. Switzerland that day, so funny. It's 3 million people, and today it's 9 million people. Switzerland hasn't changed that much in terms of population growth. Switzerland has no empire, there are no colonies, there is no large internal market, there is no domestic real industry at scale. And really, if you're founding a pharmaceutical company, or sorry, if you're founding this company, if you are Fritz Hoffmann, now La Roche, in 1896, you really have two choices. You either build something small and local, and you support this local 3 million person market, or you export from day one. There's kind of no middle path. You can't do both, right? And he chooses ambition, and he goes very quickly into his first product hit, which is a cough syrup medicine called Sirloin or Surulin, I think would be better, which is basically a syrup based on thicol, which is a kind of a glucose derivative used in tuberculose-related respiratory diseases to basically kind of manage the symptoms. So this cough syrup is like their first product to market. And this matters at the time because tuberculosis was not rare. It was endemic. There's a lovely story of Fritz living in, I think, London at one point, and basically to get through the day and not get infected by tuberculosis, he's drinking a lot of cognac and with oranges.
Exactly. Flavored cognac, not just any cognac.
Yeah, flavored cognac to get through the day. Now, I'm not saying he's got a day drinking problem. I'm saying that he's trying to sanitize his mouth to basically make sure that he's not getting infected. So this is an endemic issue and a life-threatening condition. So what Roche does, or we're going to call them Roche, but at the moment they're really Hoffmann La Roche, they do something unusual. Instead of selling bulk chemicals to doctors or pharmacists, they started making branded products ready to sell internationally. And from the beginning, this is not a chemistry lab. It's really a global commercial pharmaceutical business. It's creating branded products and it's exporting them outside Switzerland almost from day one. From 1896, this is their path.
Yeah. And I mean, there were so many problems to solve, all kinds of ailments and illnesses and symptoms to cover. So I mean, all the pharmaceutical companies that were started at this time, they started investigating something, and you really didn't know in advance which products will be the most popular ones that will be really bringing money to the company. And very easily, it of course also happened that when you find one, you start relying on the success of that one. But as we will find soon out, it was very, very unstable because due to the intellectual product rights, even if you have the greatest possible medicine today, the patent will hold only for a fixed period of time. But anyway, Sirolin, or whichever way you want to, I mean, sorry, we don't really know how to pronounce that properly, but that was clearly a success, and the decision to be export-oriented carried fruit very quickly. Already in 1910s, Roche was already heavily export dependent, and they were also from very early on, rather than using distributors or resellers, they started establishing their presence. First, a sales and distribution channel that they owned, but then also manufacturing to the foreign countries. And it's clear. I mean, Switzerland, small country, cannot absorb a meaningful pharmaceutical scale. The domestic market is minute, to say the least. And in 1911, the 25%, 1/5 of Roche's total sales came from Russia. I mean, they were early on, they were very, very actively seeking for markets everywhere. And we have to remember, in 1911, we were still talking about the Imperial Russia that was headed by a Tsar, and there was a very, very fruitful market. And it's a great thing. I mean, if you're in Basel, you cannot, in a deterministic way, to say that, okay, the market analysis shows that there's a great market in Russia. I mean, it's a trial and error.
Absolutely.
So it's it's clear. Germany, of course, another key market, much bigger, structurally more competitive, because Bayer, Höchst, BASF were there. Germany was very, very active in the chemical market already at that time. Russia was urbanizing rapidly, industrializing very unevenly, weak domestic pharma capacity, heavy reliance on imports. And yes, we have to remember that all the royal houses in those days, I mean, all these were, I mean, the Russian royalties were close relatives of the British royalties.
Yep.
So, I mean, Europe was very, very unified area, and we didn't have the Cold War division lines that later on made Europe look very, very different. Roche's products, Cyroline, digestive tonics, specialty formulations, they travel very well. And altogether, when we think about the revenues, they were around 13 to 15 million Swiss francs, based on the sources that we found. This is not a trivial for a young company, barely 50 years old. But here's the fragility. If you are export heavy from birth, you are geopolitically exposed from birth. And when you look at the years, the First World War is lurking behind the corner, and Roche was definitely suffering from the geopolitical shifts.
It's so funny because obviously it's a bit of a spoiler thing. We know what happens, right? We know World War One's coming. We know World War Two's coming. But obviously, you're the founder. You're building a company. You're buying a small thing, and you're setting off on these markets, and everything looks rosy, and all these markets look open. And now, with a kind of investor historical perspective, you're looking back, going, "Oh my God, I can see the storm clouds coming." So, in 1898, just 2 years after founding, the company's starting to expand overseas. The company runs out of money. So the initial capital structure basically put in by Fritz, it's not working, right? So basically the firm converts to a joint stock company with a capital of approximately 4 million Swiss francs. Fritz Hoffmann basically puts in the money, so he contributes basically 3 million of the family's money for that recapitalization. We couldn't find a historical record around his wife's contribution or her family contribution. It all seems to be on Fritz. But this is not a minor family top-up, right? This is a rescue-level intervention. It requires banks, it requires relatives, his brother-in-law gets involved, etc. Not on his wife's side, other. And yet, it's a difficult few years, and almost within these few years, the founder's grip on the business weakens, but the family's grip is still strong. And we're now going to introduce this second protagonist, still very early on in the story, a certain Emile C. Barrel. And really, we're going to talk less about Fritz, that becomes the brand, and we're going to talk more about Emile because he is special.
Yeah, and even if he's not the founder, even if he's not the heir apparent, there's no question that he was a driving force from a very, very, very early stage. And as we will later find out, that he also eventually took the position of the CEO after Fritz and stayed in that position for a long, long period of time. But definitely we could call him the refounder or the co-founder, in a sense that he takes shares from Fritz's brother, So he's all in, and he becomes the captain of the boat going into some very difficult seas because, as said earlier, 1911 Russia was 21% of the revenue, Germany 27%, and of course big clouds are coming from those directions. The US subsidiary was established very early because, again, Switzerland is too small. And then we come to the World War One. Germany seizes foreign subsidiaries because already at this time there was production on the other side of the Rhine River, and it's just that when you look at the map, you have right next to Basel there's the town of Grenzach in the German side, and there's immediately, I mean, the border was non-existent, but then all of a sudden, because of the World War, things are getting tougher. And Germany really seizes foreign subsidiaries. US passes the Trading with the Enemy Act. Russian economy destabilizes. And then, of course, we get the Russian Revolution in 1917. And all of a sudden, the Russian market effectively collapses. 1/5 of Roche's revenue disappears. German operations disrupted. US assets seized. And your entire business model is built on exports. And then the global trade
cooked.
collapses.
You're just cooked, right? At
Yeah,
this point,
totally.
just like US, Germany, Russia, they've all gone.
Yeah, and I mean, then if I jump to today, the disruptions that people like Emil Barel and Fritz Hoffmann, who was still alive during the First World War, geopolitics was an issue then. Geopolitics continues to be an issue even today. And it's just the name of the game. You have to understand, and you have to understand that this is not necessarily cyclical when we talk about the economic cycles. This is a systemic vulnerability, and here's the lesson. Roche is not unlucky. They are experiencing the logical consequence of being a globally ambitious company born in a small country. I mean, sounds like Finland.
It does sound very familiar.
And if you're born in America in those times, I mean, in the late 1800s, your domestic market can sustain you. If you are born in Germany, your domestic chemical base is enormous. If you're in Switzerland or Finland or any other small European nations, it means that you either export or stagnate. And exporting means geopolitical risk. So, I mean, the circle is closed. And it's funny, it's in a way funny to read the lessons that were there 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, and how familiar that sounds in today's perspective.
Yeah, it's really you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If you don't export, you're basically going to hit a local maxima and kind of hit there. And if you do export, you're going to suffer geopolitics. Now, in this case, geopolitics is wiping out 3/4 of your business with the snap of a finger, right? And that's pretty tough. So it's super interesting lessons for today's founders and investors. So we've gone into kind of the 1900s, right? The brand persists. The company is Hoffmann, La Roche and Co. Commercially, they start shortening the brand. This is where Roche kind of appears on the packaging because it's shorter, because it sounds slightly more glamorous. And coming from Britain, where we rebranded the royal family, Hoffmann sounds a little bit German.
A little bit.
A little bit German. And we've just had World War One, so Roche kind of feels a bit more neutral. So we go with Roche, right? So by 1919, sadly, our first protagonist, Fritz, dies, but the company survives this storm. Emil kind of steers them through. They are export dependent. They are structurally fragile. They've already been recapitalized once, but they are family controlled. And again, if you mention Emil Barrel's name in anybody in pharmaceutical, this is really the founder of the pharmaceutical industry. The systems and processes that he set up at this period, this is like the beginning of the sector. So he's not just a kind of co-founder, refounder of Roche. He actually helps give birth to this whole industry. So it's not yet great, it's not yet dominant, but it has absorbed this lesson around we have to be, if we're going to be ambitious, we basically have to survive these shocks because more is coming. Sorry, Roche, spoiler alert, more is coming. It's going to get harder before it gets easier. But I love this start to the story because it's very much, we think we live in turbulent times, and then you look back to the 1890s and going into the 1920s, and I don't think we have anything to really complain about.
Yeah, but there's also another thing that is important to remember. It is absolutely clear that I'm sure that Fritz, nor even Emil, at least in this time of the process, didn't see the future in 100 years. But they were trying to make the life of the people around them easier, to help them with their ailments and diseases. And even if there was war, partly the war also boosted the medical profession and the medical sciences. So I mean, even if we started with cough syrup in the late 1800s, by the 1920s, the medical sciences had advanced quite a bit, which means that you had essentially an endless cornucopia of possible candidates for a future medicine or cure. So in a way, you have this widening opportunity space in front of you where you can find new ways of helping your countrymen and people in your export market.
Absolutely. Okay, so listeners, that's Act One: born global, born small, survive. Let's now move into Act Two, which is, as Marty said, this early engine around vitamins. So, as I said, Roche starts to behave as an industrial manufacturing company. Yeah, so it's not about these one-off medicines. It's about effectively something else. How can we make something that works at scale? And that category is vitamins. So Roche doesn't stumble into vitamins as a side quest. Vitamins become this machine scalable chemistry, repeatable demand, global distribution, and cash flow. This is moving from snake oil cough syrup, right? Alleviate symptoms of tuberculosis in Tsarist Russia. And we start to focus on more of the kind of vitamin health, meeting the needs of a more modern society, and how that helps the business.
Yeah, and of course, this would be the time to pause on why vitamins or vitamins, whichever way you want to pronounce that, become that machine when they do. I mean, it was essentially, you were essentially finding out that when you extract this specific component from, for example, fruit, it has the beneficial effect on a human body. And it's just the result of the science behind going forward. When the public health improves, the germ theory spreads, and I mean, we talked about this in the Zeiss episode, something else starts happening. The definition of health expands. You don't just treat a crisis, you manage the body, you manage the health of your customer. You start to see the boundary between medicine and nutrition. All of a sudden, the role of nutrition, the stuff that you eat, becomes more and more important, and also they become the commercial battlefield. That shift creates a category where you can sell to a much broader population than people currently fearing for death. And all of a sudden you can sell repeatedly because deficiency prevention is a recurring behavior. So lifetime customers value becomes a thing. And I mean, of course, from the commercial point of view, this is excellent. From treating the sick, from treating the sick to treating the healthy people.
Yeah, look, if I give you a medicine and you don't die, I sell it to you once, right?
Yes.
If I give you a vitamin or vitamin and you take it for the rest of your life, and hopefully your life expectancy goes beyond 40, because we're trying to improve society, it's a different ballgame. So I do like the fact that lifetime customer value actually starts to happen. Switzerland is a forcing function. We've already explained that ad infinitum. Okay. But exporting fragile branded medicines in the early 1900s is hard. Supply chains are inconsistent. Regulation is messy. And you still need this physician's trust country by country. Whereas vitamins are just easy, right? Because you can basically sell them as a chemical product at industrial scale, and basically it moves beyond, as we said, this snake oil and becomes this really strong engine of growth for the company.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing that happens here behind is that when we started from extracting the beneficial compounds from the nature, the key element was how you learned little by little to synthesize the same items, which means that rather than collecting a lot of plants, you can use chemical processes that you learn to master to produce the stuff. So the Roche begins to building two things at once. One track is the classic pharma track, high stakes therapies for severe diseases, and the other one is the quietly compounding track, a chemistry and manufacturing engine that throws off cash. And the engine accelerates in the 90s when vitamin science crosses the line from academic curiosity to industrial synthesis. And this is really the key, which is the story of Roche, is that they were investing early on for the manufacturing capacity. So in their make-buy policy, they had a very, very solid science. They wanted to control the manufacturing, and they relied on their own distribution channels. So a fully integrated and a centrally controlled facility, because already at this time, the company was functionally organized, and you were actually not expecting the functional parts of the company to actually talk too much with each other. Everything was actually very centrally led by the CEO.
Yeah, and look, listeners, I think this is super interesting point. This is a company. We saw this with EssilorLuxottica. They invest heavily in technology early. Like a lot of their cash proceeds in these early years is going back into R&D and manufacturing capability, right? So the best companies we study keep pushing the technological frontier. They keep improving their systems. They don't stick with one machine that does one job. And vitamin C is the turning point. So once you can synthesize ascorbic acid reliably, you're no longer limited to basically extracting those trace quantities from limes and lemons. You can industrialize it, and Roche moves early and aggressively. And you can see this style when they believe a scientific shift creates a manufactured product category. They don't dabble, they build capacity, they build branding, and they build distribution, and they go hard on this space.
And in order to do that, they need the best sellers. They need the products that sell well, because this is a very capital intensive industry to be involved with. There's also the psychological layer here. Vitamins have a story the public understands. It's easier to sell in a way, easily legible. If you can put vitamin C on the package and link it to strength, recovery, or resilience, or overall health, especially as the world moves through depression area scarcity and then wartime rationing, you've got a product that crosses classes and geographies. It's not a drug for a rare condition. It's a health insurance, a health promise you can swallow, and of course, you can buy and bring revenues for the manufacturer and the seller.
Yeah, and I think this is important. We are at this period of time where people are starting to care about their health. Life expectancy is increasing. So Redoxon, which is their flagship vitamin C product, it's a kind of a lead product, but it's also a template that Roche will reuse later. You take a molecule, you manufacture it at scale, you brand it in a way that makes it culturally sticky, and Redoxon becomes a consumer-facing spear point. And behind the scenes, Roche builds a deeper vitamins portfolio that increasingly looks like this vertically integrated chemical business. So this is the lead, but more comes behind it.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, also today, vitamin C is the iconic one, but there were so many others, vitamins A, D, E, B, the various B vitamins. And here's the key. A large portion of the vitamins aren't just sold as pills to consumers. They become ingredients for food fortification and a totally different customer segment, animal nutrition. Because what it turns out to be that when you add the vitamins to the stuff that either animals or people eat, you can prove that there are some health benefits that come out of this. So you have a huge customer base. This ingredient angle matters because it's how Roche gets scale and stability. If your demand comes only from consumers buying the pills you are exposed to fads. If demand comes from industries that formulate vitamins into other products, you're embedded into different supply chains, and therefore you have some stability when the demand is varying within these supply chains.
Marty, I don't know if you felt the same. So when I was digging into this part of Roche's journey, it felt like Mars, the kind of chocolate company. Because again, Mars has kind of a recession-proof business, right? It sells chocolate, so if the economy's going well, people celebrate by buying chocolate, giving it to each other. If the economy's going badly, people feel sad, so they buy chocolate. So that's part of the business. And then the other part of the business that most people don't see is Mars is the largest pet food creator in the world, right? And what is the one thing that people don't stop doing during a bad economy is they don't stop feeding their pets because they run out of money, right? That pet is a family member. And again, this vitamins into other people's businesses, that's a great business in itself, right? So actually going across the chain makes it a really powerful business. So we're just going to foreshadow so that people understand where this business ends up. So if we look at the numbers that by the early 2000s, and me and Marty, we're still in World War II territory at this point, right? We're still hearing the story. But if we wind the clock forward to the 2000, and this is long after vitamins has become an important business to Roche, right? It's about 3 billion in revenue, right? In Swiss francs. It's about 3 billion in revenue. The volume of products sold basically is 7% year on year. Operating margins are still good. And again, it's not the best business they have, but almost 50 years after they created it, it's still billions in revenue to this company. And it just shows in its heyday what a cash engine that I wouldn't say stumbled onto, that's unfair, but what a cash engine when they moved from kind of snake oil sales, cough syrup, and cognac and orange flavored cough syrup, and we move into vitamins, they start generating cash quick.
Yeah. And those margins are clue to the strategic arc here. Vitamins are a great early engine, but they're also a trap if you mistake scale for defensibility. Over time, vitamins become increasingly competitive, increasingly price pressured, and increasingly exposed to commodity dynamics. You can do everything right operationally and still face erosion because the category invites capacity build out, new entrants, and price competition. And what was the way to tackle this? Roche was very early on putting emphasis on their production machine. Production and production cost was key because they knew that if you are trying to sell something to United States or to Germany, you have to be more affordable than the local market player that has some sort of a home advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think Roche is they do very well, or Emile, etc., does very well to steer the company through this vitamins because it so easily could have been a success that became a trap, right? And they use it to build their strength, but they start to compound the value elsewhere. It generates cash, but they know there's no moat, or I think they work out very quickly there's no moat. But it's a great first act, right? And if vitamins had not come along, we wouldn't be talking about this company. Like it wouldn't have progressed down that path of success, but this is the first big win. And again, I think it's really interesting. It sets up the DNA of this company that they are an industrial engine, yeah, but it leaves them with enough cash to start focusing on higher value medicine and diagnostics later into the story.
Yeah. And what was the takeaway for Roche internally, culturally, was that vitamins made Roche comfortable with the idea that you can be a science company and you can be a manufacturing company at the same time. Some pharma firms are essentially marketing machines with outsourced production. Roche learns the opposite in instinct. Keep a tight relationship between science and production because production capability shapes what science you can actually commercialize.
I think this is really interesting. And again, when we say Emil is the kind of founder of pharma as it is, it's so interesting how Roche goes in one direction, coupling science and manufacturing, and others, they're just packagers. Right? They license a molecule, create a molecule, send it to somebody else, they produce it, and they just put their brand on it. And Roche doesn't do that, right? And I think that's super interesting. Vitamins are the kind of product that Roche can ship everywhere, which is great because Switzerland is still small and still surrounded. So they build distribution, they keep the Roche name, and basically, as they move towards more specialized medicines, they're not learning how to sell them globally because they've already been selling globally from day one. And I think another aspect of their vitamins business is it established a global distribution chain, which they can use for other acts as they come forward.
But here's the tension. Vitamins broaden you into mass markets, while the future of pharma narrows into specialization. As medicine advances, the obvious low-hanging fruit, simple deficiencies, basic infectious disease interventions, gets progressively solved or at least managed. The frontier becomes more complex: cancers, autoimmune diseases, genetic disorders, and the layered system of diagnostics and targeted therapy.
Yeah. So we're now starting to move away from vitamins because we've set the scene around this capital allocation over time. So we build an engine that scales, we use the engine to fund research capability, we move up the value chain, repeat. Generate cash, allocate the capital to the next thing, basically draw up the ladder behind us, move on to the next one, keep doing that for 100 years if you can. Good luck.
Yeah, but there's clearly, you have the cash cow, you have the mass market, vitamins and chemicals, but they all also understood the short-term nature of this competitive position. You need to get into more specialized pharmaceuticals and diagnostics, and that's really going to be driving the development going forward. Roche needs both. You have the stability provided by vitamins, but the research side provides your destiny, your future.
Yeah, and listeners, if you're thinking, isn't this just the arc of modern medicine? Well, yes, we said that already. It is. Roche's story is also modern medicine's story. But it's also the fact that this is a good news story. We're dealing with the acute mass killers, right? We're actually increasing the average person from sadly dying in their 50s in, nice place to live, mountainous, Heidi in the valleys, Switzerland. And we're actually dealing with those. But Roche, again, listen here. We don't think that Roche gets positioned on the tide and just carried in this way. Roche is an active participant. They are helping to create this wave that they are themselves riding. And vitamins are not the end state. Vitamins helps Roche fund the climb, but effectively they're just part of the story.
Yeah, and I mean the big transformation is getting from treating health to the optimizing stage, because the eventually, rather than just making an overall diagnosis, you need to identify the subtypes of diseases, match the targeted therapies, use diagnostics not just to detect disease, but to steer treatment decisions, essentially to tailor the medicine and the treatment that is used for your specific patient, because people are reacting differently to the treatment. So it's not one treatment for all, and having the extremely solid basis in science is helping Roche to be one of those companies that are in the forefront of this transition.
So, listeners, let's anchor where we are in the story. We're in 1945. Roche survives the war intact. Survival is great because Switzerland was neutral, but neutral when you got the Third Reich as your neighbor, neutral wasn't exactly safe. There's a reason why Switzerland built so many bunkers during World War II. I think they have as many bunkers as Finland has, right? The country is mobilized, supply chains are fragile, markets are distorted. yes, Roche's German competitors and so weaken post World War II, but continental Europe, you look across, it is trashed. Europe after World War II is not a happy place. Rationing continues for many years. But Roche emerges from World War II stronger than it enters. Thank you, vitamins. You've strengthened the person, you've strengthened the company. The wartime saw Emil in the States. So basically, he spends his wartime in the States helping to build the business over there. So he's not bored by any stretch. He returns to Basel in 1946, and effectively Roche America's been doing well, but Roche Europe starts to move. And in 1948, Roche introduces a product, Gantristin, a sulfonic antibiotic. So it's their first antibiotic, and it becomes the company's first significant, what you would argue, pharmaceutical success. Then in 1952, in comes Riffion, which is one of the first effective treatments for tuberculosis. And now we're moving from cough syrup that kind of alleviated symptoms to something that might treat tuberculosis, which is still, sadly, in 1948, a global killer. Vitamins are happening, but pharmaceuticals becomes the name of the game in Roche. And by the early 90s, they're no longer a simple exporter, starting to behave like a modern research-based pharmaceutical company. And revenue starts to be diversified across vitamins and drugs. And the headcount has expanded internationally. The United States, it has become a strategic, particularly during the war years, strategic marketplace. And again, I think before we leave Act 2, I do want to pay a tribute to kind of Emil Barrel, because again, in so much of the research, he really comes across as the true founder, it's going to sound heretical, of Roche. Right? But he comes across as the founder of the pharmaceutical industry. What he builds during this period is truly impressive. He builds the foundation on which this company then thrives.
Yeah, and I mean he was of course quite a character. He was loud, he was direct, and he was in a way a very old school boss. You can imagine, but he was leading the company through two world wars essentially. I mean, yes, he was not in charge during the First World War, but he was the one who had to rebuild the company after the stress of the Russian Revolution and the First World War. And we are still talking about, I don't remember the exact amount of people they have at the moment, but I mean, around when he's closing his tenure, I mean, there were something like 4 or 5,000 people altogether, because they were hit hard. Their revenues were hit hard, and also the number of people that they had was in the European side had diminished quite a bit, even if it increased in the United States. But he essentially he was the captain in helm in charge of two major recoveries of major black swans that were very difficult to predict beforehand. So quite a tenure. And when we think about all these years that he was, I think he was more than 50 years working for the company in various roles when we take his roles before being the captain at the helm. So quite an impressive career altogether.
Yeah, and very impressive. And Martti, and again, there was a potential spin-off and a breakup of the US entity. The US entity almost at this stage kind of gets separated, etc. But almost the family and the CFO at the time kind of holds the business together. That doesn't happen. That would be a really interesting counterfactual. So again, listeners, when we go into Act 3, we're kind of in the 1950s. And this is where we're going to transition our story from. We've said goodbye to Emil, he's amazing, but suddenly his time on the helm has come to an end. And now the company moves from vitamins to Valium. And now we start talking about this blockbuster drug. So, by the early 90s, Roche is no longer a fragile Swiss exporter fighting German chemical giants. It is a serious pharmaceutical company. Vitamins are paying the bills. Tuberculosis drugs and antibiotics have started to diversify revenue. The center of gravity is shifting. We're at to about effectively 1 billion Swiss francs, so about 230 to 300, 250 million at the time in US dollars. And the United States has become Roche's largest single market. No surprise, Europe's trashed, right? Headcount is climbing upwards. By the 1960s, we're up to 15,000 staff globally. So we've done this big turnaround. R&D spending, once modded, is now consuming a meaningful share of operational profit. And that's not accidental. This is a deliberate choice to basically get out of vitamins, not get out of, but diversify away from. And in 1957, in a lab in Nutley, New Jersey, Roche lab, something quite unexpected happens. So what
Yeah.
happens there, Marty?
Well, before we go there, I want to mention Albert Keflish, who was in the helm of the company for more than 10 years, and he was actually the guy who grew the company. He was in charge of the massive growth after the Second World War. He was in charge of the massive growth of the company. So just to mention
Yeah.
him, one of the guys holding the baton in the relay race. But anyway, let's get to Nutley, New Jersey, late 50s, and the real protagonist here is Leo Sternbach. He's not Swiss, he's a Polish-Jewish chemist who fled Nazi Europe and joined Roche's US research arm in the 80s. And oh, by the way, Roche, who of course had a lot of activities in Germany, they also actually evacuated many Jews who had been working for Roche. They evacuated them and sent them to work in the US subsidiary. That was one of the reasons why the US subsidiary was growing very rapidly. So Roche Nutley in New Jersey was beginning to resemble something different from Basel, from its chemical roots, becoming a serious American research center. Sternbach had been working on tranquilizers, compounds that might calm anxiety without the heavy sedation of barbiturates. For years, nothing promising emergence, and then almost by accident in 1957, a compound from an earlier synthesis is re-examined. It becomes chlorodiazepoxide, and eventually becoming a product brand under the name Librium in 1960. Within 3 years, Roche has becoming something extraordinary and having a brand new product, a bestseller in its hands. Librium rapidly becomes one of the most prescribed psychiatric drugs in the world. It's safer than barbiturates. It reduces anxiety without profound respiratory depression. Physicians embrace it. Patients ask for it by name. But Librium is only the beginning. In 1963, Roche launches a more potent successor, diazepam, marketed as Valium. And this changes everything.
Yeah, it certainly does. So, to understand the scale, we need to do a little pause. Today, if you study the pharma industry, and that's what Marty and I have spent the last month doing, you very quickly hear the term blockbuster drug. So just imagine blockbuster in air quotes, blockbuster drug. And in modern pharma, this means a drug generating over $1 billion annually in sales. Okay, in 1965, which is where we are when Valium comes out, the global pharmaceutical industry is much smaller than that. So when Valium crosses 100 million in annual sales in the late 1960s, this is seismic. This is unbelievable. No one has done this before. So adjusted for inflation, that is basically $1 billion in revenue. In a single year. So by the 1970s, Valium becomes the single best-selling prescription drug in the world. Oh my gosh. And at its peak in the mid-1970s, Valium generates approximately 600 million annual in terms of revenue, which would be about 3 billion today. So this is unheard of, right? This is Roche in the vitamins business, low margin, global distribution. This is Amazon running a bookstore, and then suddenly we've discovered AWS, and literally the cash gushers kick in. This is crazy money. It really is. And at this point, in the mid 1970s, Valium is like 1/3 of Roche's total pharmaceutical revenue and a very disproportionate share of profit. And again, I think this is a moment where Roche transforms from a diversified industrial pharmaceutical company into we're just going to chase down blockbuster drugs because clearly it makes that much money. And the economics, as I've said, are very different from vitamins. This changes everything. You're looking at growth. This is NVIDIA GPUs. You're looking at gross margins for these drugs at these times of about 60 to 7%, 60 to 70%, like NVIDIA's type scale. This is like software as a service revenues and NVIDIA profits. This cash engine divorce everything that they've done before. But the problem is, and there is a sting in the tail, it's all based on intellectual property and patent.
Yeah. And in addition to the patents, there are things that are happening in the marketplace. And one of the key things is that in the 1960s, the regulatory framework is getting tighter. I mean, after the thalidomide disaster, which was not a Roche product, not at all, but had a huge shock in the industry. In the United States, there was the Kefauver-Harris amendments in the legislation, and they require proof of efficacy, and not just safety before FDA approval. Clinical trials become more rigorous. Development timelines lengthen. R&D costs begin their steady upward climb. And in 1950, bringing a drug to market might cost a few $1,000,000. By the 1970s, estimates suggest tens of millions. By today, of course, it exceeds 1 to 2 billion fully loaded. So here's the key. Roche is already structured to survive this transition. And of course, the question is why? Because vitamins paid for research infrastructure. Roche built laboratories in Basel and Nutley before they had drugs in modern sense. Because Emil Barrel's earlier insistence on reinvesting profits into chemistry and biology created depth. Roche enters the regulated era not as a trading house, but as a science institution, and that distinction matters enormously. And this is one of the stories. I mean, if you'd like to establish a pharmaceutical company in the 1960s, it would have been so much more difficult. And when you look at the major brand names in pharmaceutical industry today, many of them actually have their roots in the 1800s, when it was easier to start and build a company culture that is then providing the profits in the long term.
Look, clearly we have a survivorship bias, but there's no question. When was the best time to start your pharmaceutical business? In the 1800s, when the regulations were basically non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
You had to survive a few financial shocks, and I'm being very mean, like World War One is, and the collapse of Tsarist Russia, and having your market. That's more than a few shocks. You had to survive. You had to have some hopeful family members with deep pockets to dig you out of the proverbial. But if you got through this and learned how to distribute at scale, and then basically plowed your money into research, if you ended up with a business like Roche, you ended up with this blockbuster drug, and that produces the cash, hopefully, for your next transformation. And again, listeners, remember we're on this arc of modern medicine. There's another layer to this transformation. You've got this CNS, this central nervous system. This becomes the defining therapeutic category. Both Librium and Valium, right? They're psychiatric medicines. They're pretty crude. Sorry, before them, it was pretty crude. Electroshock therapy, heady sedatives, institutionalization, throw them in the loony bin, not so good stuff. Valium.
Lobotomy.
Yeah, of course, yeah, lobotomy. Yeah. So not good remedies.
No,
but
not
what was
at all.
available at the time. So Roche's drugs make anxiety and mild depression treatable in an outpatient setting. But when you make something widely available at an outpatient settings, it suddenly, and there's a reason why it's very profitable, it goes everywhere. So in the 1966, I'd love this. I'd forgotten about this song. The Rolling Stones release Mother's Little Helper, which if you go back and listen to it, viewers, a Rolling Stone classic. And it's not even a veiled criticism of how urban housewives in America get through the day by popping pills. It's very blatant in that respect. So basically, this causes a real pushback. By 1975, Valium is prescribed so widely that it basically gets criticized and for overuse and dependence. So the challenge for Roche is Valium makes it extremely profitable. That profit brings reputational risk. They get super worried about being dependent on this blockbuster drug. Lawsuits start happening, public scrutiny, and this is really the first time that Roche has been in, for want of a better word, the public arena. So this high reward, high concentration, high political visibility, this doesn't feel
Yeah.
very comfortable for the family
Yeah.
or the business.
Yeah. And of course, the tenure of Albert Cavendish had terminated in 1969. There was Dr. Jan, Adolf Walter Jan, who came into the helm. And he was not an industrialist in the traditional sense. He was more like a salesman and an overall charmer. I mean, I understand that it's difficult to be humble when you have products like that under your belt. And let's say, I mean, when I was reading the history, I strongly feel that under Dr. Jan's tenure, the focus of the company kind of shifted
Yep.
away from the core science and the production efficiency. And then there's another thing that is important to remember. This is a privately owned company. It is not disclosing anything in practice. They are keeping everything hidden. Any assessment of the profitability of the entire company is based on the public image of Valium and the massive amounts of money that it brings, and the fact that the public relations had not mandated openness only made things worse, and this was really a catastrophe heading their way. Well, in 1970, their revenues were exceeded 2 billion. Pharmaceuticals dominated group profit. Vitamins still is significant, but still secondary. Roche was spending more than 10% of sales to R&D. Very high figure. They had more than 20,000 people. United States, the largest revenue contributor. Basel headquarters. But the point is that it doesn't matter how things are when you are not telling that to anybody. It was the wild rumors and then the whole 1970s, let's say the animosity toward big pharma started in the 1970s. And Roche was not doing a great job in trying to bring the real facts to the marketplace. They tried to be secretive thanks to the more flamboyant CEO who was in the helm until 1978. They were really experiencing a major public relations catastrophe.
Yeah, this period is definitely not to be romanticized. This is not so good for them. They are shifting away from kind of the family controlled chemistry company. Pfizer, Merck, Eli Lilly, these American giants are expanding aggressively. This is a competitive market that Roche is in. The Nutley Lab is still an amazing research center. And actually, Russia's culture at the time is pretty decentralized, so the scientific leaders have some great autonomy. Again, Leo Stoneback did not discover this miracle blockbuster opportunity because of a top-down corporate mandate. This part of the business is still very chemistry and scientistry led, and the tolerance for experimentation is still part of Roche's DNA despite the sales mandate. And this matters again for biotechnology. You can see the kind of path from Nutley through to where they go next.
Yeah, and then of course, I mean, even if you have this blockbuster of a drug in your product portfolio, the patents expire. There was a lot of discussion in these years about what is the proper price that you are allowed to get. I mean, many governments were of the opinion that your margins are way too high, and so there was a lot of pressure. The sales were declining in the late. There were lawsuits lawsuits that were based on dependence that were accumulating. The public mood shifted against tranquilizers, and the vitamins markets were definitely very fast. They were commodizing, and margin compress. German, Japanese competitors increasing pressure. So this is definitely a familiar problem. The cash engine that once seemed permanent is aging.
Absolutely. Again, listeners, we've the vitamin story is over. The Valium story is basically over. Roche needs to move. And the question for most corporates or businesses is, well, where to? Like, where's the market pull? What's my core skills? What's my capability? Where can I go to unlock more value and more capability before basically we suffer from price collapse? So, the answer is definitely not another tranquilizer. All right, it's not going to work. The answer for Roche will be diagnostics and biotechnology. Yeah, but that requires them to cannibalize this business, to cannibalize this engine, and basically move further up the stack.
Yeah, and I mean this period that we are talking from the mid 50s to mid 70s to late 70s, Roche became a modern pharmaceutical company. Before that, it was a chemical manufacturer with pharmaceutical ambitions. But after this, it was definitely innovation-driven, patent-protected, globally regulated enterprise, and that helped quite a bit. And here one of the core elements was that in 1978 there was a new CEO that came into picture, and that was Fritz Gerber, who funnily enough, he continued to be the CEO of Zurich Insurance at the same time.
Really?
So he was actually riding two horses at the same time. So from 78, I mean, he was working for the insurance company, young guy, a real career rocket that was working for Zurich Insurance. He was lured to come to Roche as well, but from 1978 until 1991, he continued to be the CEO of Zurich Insurance as well. So I mean, this is unbelievable. But let's see. I mean, we need to go forward with the process. So let's talk about that a little bit later.
No, but I love it. LinkedIn is clearly not around in this period of time, but his LinkedIn profile would have been priceless, right? You know,
Yeah.
oh, I'm CEO of 2 companies, right?
Yes.
During
And then, of course, when he was appointed to be the successor to Dr. Yan, he didn't have any experience from pharmaceutical industry.
Of course.
He was just a very, very promising guy. But a lot of nice things happened.
Yeah, no, like Fritz is a real character. Let's dig in. Okay, so listeners, we've reached the end of Act 3. We're now going to move into Act 4. So we're moving now the narrative from blockbusters to biotech. And the period of time we're going to talk about now is the 1980s. We're in the 80s, the 1980s to basically the early 2000s. So by 1980, Roche is definitely a giant, but it's a fragile one. So we've given you the numbers on Valium. Valium is the best-selling drug in the world, blah, blah, blah. That's all great. Okay. But, and here comes the but, in 1985, Valium loses exclusivity in the United States, and generic competition hits immediately. As soon as you lose your exclusivity, as soon as generics arrive, the money is over. A few people buy because of brand, but everybody else buys because of price. So your market share erodes with astonishing speed, right? And within a few years, revenues for Valium are basically, they're gone. So this is Roche's first modern patent cliff, and it's definitely a warning, right? And it's time, well, you've already introduced him, Marty. We've got this Fritz Gerber character, and he is just an astonishing person, and he leads us through this next period.
Yeah, and what he does is he essentially is not at all as flamboyant as his predecessor. He starts looking at the company, starts looking at the production. He's very commercially and strategically minded. He talks to the customers, and he sees 2 things clearly. First, the chemistry alone will not create the next generation of durable medicines. And the second, Roche must move upstream into deeper biology before competitors do. And another thing which I want to mention here is that it was Fritz Gerber who, for example, started the systematic company internal education for commercialization, for business development, all that. I mean, Nestle was a pioneer. They had started the systematic training of their executives and managers already before Roche. So Roche was not the first one, but Fritz was the one who brought this culture to Roche. I'm sure that many know about the Peters and Waterman book, In Search of Excellence. Many of you have read it. It's actually Roche is one of the companies that was used as a source material, and what was used as source material were the changes that were done under the leadership of Fritz. But anyway, that alone didn't solve the strategic problem. The key point is that Roche made one of the boldest moves in European pharmaceutical history in 1990 by acquiring majority stake, 60%, of the first biotech company in the world, California's Genentech, with a price tag of something like 2.1 billion.
Now, at the time, 2.1 billion, 1990, this is not a trivial amount of money, even for a company like Genentech. Genentech itself is almost worth an entire Category Leaders Who Lost story, because Genentech is a fascinating business all on its own right. It came out of Southern California. It pioneered recombinant DNA capabilities. It went through its own hero's journey. It was the first company to bring synthetic human insulin and growth hormone to market. And it helped make Silicon Valley's VC firm Kleiner Perkins First Fund an iconic 42x. Right now, if you know anything about VC funds, 42x is a very big result indeed. And to give Kleiner and certainly Perkins credit for this, they work hard. They incubate this business inside their firm, and they drive it towards the IPO in 1980. And again, it's quite common in venture law. This is one that's talked about because in 1980, when Genentech IPO, this was the biggest initial public offering at the time, and only eclipsed a few months later by Apple. That literally there's those two in 1980 and almost nothing else. So this was a really big deal, and Genentech was an amazing research culture, Silicon Valley does biotech story, informality, hippie type scientists with ponytails down their back, smoking marijuana, and basically doing recombinant DNA. Genentech is an interesting company. But by 1990, it was struggling, right? And it hadn't achieved its velocity and its breakout potential. And I think this is a great deal for Roche, despite the price tag, because Roche really buys into this cutting edge culture of scientists really pushing the frontier. And this is not revenue acquisition for Roche. Genentech has a bunch of products on the market. It's very much a platform research acquisition play.
Yeah, the logic is subtle but profound. Traditional small molecules drugs are chemically synthesized. They are relatively easy to replicate once patents expire. Biologics, proteins, monoclonal antibodies, engineered molecules are fundamentally different. They are complex, they are harder to manufacture, more difficult to copy, often tied to specific biological pathways. They promise deeper targeting and potentially longer economic durability. This is effectively buying access to a new scientific paradigm. And when we look at the history of Roche, this is probably the most pivotal moves that Roche has made in its whole enterprise history.
Yeah, this is a big one. Genentech is super interesting, and the bet pays off in the late 1990s. Genentech team in 1997 launched Rituxan, developed by Genentech, is approved for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It becomes one of the first successful monoclonal antibody cancer therapies. In 1998, Herceptin is approved for HER2 positive breast cancer. And Herceptin is a watershed moment because it's not just a drug, it's a targeted therapy paired with a diagnostic test to identify patients whose tumors overexpress this HER2 sequence. And this is the beginning for Roche. Now Genentech inside, partnered. This is the beginning of precision oncology.
Yeah, and financially these products transform Roche's trajectory. By the early 2000s, Herceptin alone is generating billions of annual revenue. Rituxan becomes a multi-billion-dollar product. Oncology grows into the core of the pharmaceutical division. At the same time, Roche's diagnostics business is strengthening. It expands through acquisitions in laboratory systems, blood testing, clinical chemistry. Diagnostics becomes a steady high-margin contributor. And here's the strategic elegance. Roche is now one of the few companies in the world that can both diagnose and treat. And there's one little jump to the history. They had entered already 100 years before, or almost 100 years before, they had entered the diagnostics and it didn't work out, and they sold the company. They had a
Yep.
company in Germany. So, I mean, even if they had abandoned this segment once in the ancient history, it turned out to be the strategic edge when times changed.
And I think, listeners, this is super important to get. When Roche moves from Valium to oncology, arguably, they have to do precision medicine. They have to do diagnostics alongside precision medicine because it kind of doesn't work. It's two sides of the same coin. If you
Here.
don't know what the patient has, how can you treat that patient? Not the population, vitamin C, take it, it's good for everybody. Like, we're now down to that individual patient level. And that dual capability really matters. Because as we've said, Roche's story is the story of modern medicine's evolution. Medicine is changing. Diseases like tuberculosis, we spent a lot of time talking about tuberculosis. This affected vast populations uniformly. Broad spectrum drugs made sense. But by now, we're in the 1980s, those infection killers are controlled. We are talking about autoimmune disease, chronic metabolic conditions. Yeah, these vary from patient to patient, which means therapy must become more specific. And Roche is positioning itself not just around a single disease, but around the ability to match the right drug to the right patient.
And then comes Chugai. In 2002, Roche acquired a majority stake in Chugai Pharmaceuticals of Japan in a transaction valued at roughly 1.4 billion. Chugai is not simply a geographic expansion to Japan, it's a biotechnology company with strong antibody engineering capabilities. It brings molecules like Acterma, later a major immunology product. Genentech anchors the United States. Chugai anchors Japan. Basel remains the capital allocator and systems integrator. Even if, I mean, one of the things which is a little bit a sidestep here, it was obvious that coming to the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it was year by year, it was obvious that having a pharmaceutical manufacturing company in Switzerland was not a long-term solution. It was both cost, availability of workforce, and the regulatory and public relations domains that made actually Switzerland less and less attractive. And this expansion to United States, Genentech, to Japan was also fulfilling a remedy to that part of the story.
Absolutely. And again, I think, Marty, this is a good point. In 2002, Roche sells its vitamins business. It's been a while, right? You know, the vitamins business has basically had 100 years run within Roche. It diverts its vitamins and fine chemicals division. That's it. It's over. Roche is out of the vitamins space. And it's kind of out of the industrial chemistry kind of space too. It's very much a pharma and diagnostics company. It's kind of drawn up the bridge. It's out of the low margin bookstore business. We're now just AWS.
Now, financially, the shift is very, very visible. And by the early 2000s, oncology represents a growing share of pharmaceutical revenue. Biologics represent a growing share of total sales. R&D spending is materially higher in absolute terms than in the 1980s. The economic engine has fundamentally changed. Roche is no longer dependent on a single blockbuster tranquilizer. It's building a portfolio of biologics with deep scientific moats.
Yeah, and I think what makes this period important is that it doesn't just acquire these biotechs. Like, again, listeners, think about Roche's like headquartered in Basel, but it has this research division in Genentech that is producing these amazing drugs. It has this research division in Chugai in Japan producing these amazing molecules. It has R&D capability in Switzerland. Think of it like a triangle. Those are the three elements for it. And it keeps these businesses independent. At this point, 2002, Roche is a part owner of Genentech. It's not a full owner, right? It keeps their cultures alive. It keeps them doing what they do very well at high quality and high scale. It keeps the scientists very much in charge. That is a very smart move.
Yeah, and the thing that is happening in the at the same time, I mean, there were many activities that they actually divested. I mean, the Finnish people who know of xylitol, the sugar that is still today very widely used in chewing gums in
Okay.
Finland. That was a Roche invention. And with Suomen Sokeri, the Finnish national sugar producing company, they had a joint venture with Roche. And today the production continues, but Roche has divested their share years ago. Another element that our Finnish audience may know of is Genencore, which was a joint venture of Genentech and Corning, and they are producing enzymes, for example, for pulp production. So Genencore still has activities in Finland. They are not part of Genentech, they are not part of Roche anymore, but they are still producing enzymes that are improving the pulp production in the Finnish pulp mills, and of course in many other countries as well. So the key here is really a very strategic management of their industrial portfolio, where divestments of non-core businesses are equally important than investments to the companies that they acquire. And even if we are not mentioning all the companies that they acquired, there are plenty
Absolutely.
that happened in this time. And this brought really Roche to this inflection point where the whole company portfolio is completely different, where oncology is a core element, diagnostics and biotechnology are actually then the cash cows of Roche.
I think about Roche like the kind of ship of Theseus, which is the boat sets off, and over time on our journey we replace every single plank. We get to the other end. Is it still the same boat?
Yes.
And to me, Roche is that, right? They
Yeah,
basically
absolutely.
methodically replace the planks of the ship. And by the time we get to 2000, we started in 1894 slash
Yeah.
really 1896 in the register. By the time we get to 2000, this is not the same business,
Yeah.
right?
And if you ask from anybody who has repaired or renovated an old wooden sailboat, even if you change all the planks, it's the same boat.
Oh my goodness. I love it. Okay, so that brings us to the end of Act 4. Let's now move into Act 5. We're on the home straight, listeners. Thank you so much for staying with us. So, we're now going to talk about from the 2000s, which is about control, governance, if we're putting in those terms, and precision medicine platform. And this is going to take us through to modern times, 2026. Okay, so by 2002, Roche is no longer a tranquilizer company. It's not a vitamin conglomerate. It's a biotechnology platform and diagnostics business. But that strength, and it is strong at this point. You know, it's generated a lot of cash in the 80s and up to the 2000s. That attracts pressure because the European pharmaceutical landscape is starting to consolidate. And one rival that isn't particularly far away is watching very closely. Another Swiss company called Novartis.
Yeah, and being very close because Siba, I believe they were also from Basel. So I mean, they are your people next door.
They are the neighbors.
But I mean, Novartis is the name now that we focus on, and they are a product of a merger. And in 1996, the Ciba-Geigy and Sandoz merged, and it became Novartis, still headquartered in Basel with the old Ciba way, just down the road. Very ambitious, and in around 2001, Novartis quietly begins accumulating shares in Roche. By 2002, it had built a substantial minority position, roughly 20% of Roche's shares, but not a controlling stake, but enough to matter.
Yeah, and this is not really a friendly investment. This isn't the neighbors lending you the barbecue, right? Or the lawnmower. This is strategic pressure. Because if Novartis can accumulate more, it can destabilize Roche's governance and it could engineer a merger. Now, again, from a purely industrial perspective, this would make sense. Basel is a small town, right? City in Switzerland. You bring together the two biggest companies. You've got combined R&D, combined distribution, combined oncology pipelines. On paper, this makes sense.
Yeah, but Roche is not a normal public company. I mean, it essentially privately held. There were two series of shares, voting control anchored by the founding families, essentially the descendants of Hoffman and Uri families who control the majority of voting shares. And we saw the same thing with Essilor and Luxottica. And the capital is public, but the control is not. And this is the first real test of that structure in the modern era.
Yeah, and Novartis increases its stake. Like, it's here to win. At one point, it controls about 1/3 of the non-voting equity. Speculation is in rife. Politics is happening. Is Roche in play? Is Basel going to consolidate? What do the families do? They could easily sell at this point. They've had a good 100-year run at this business. They could accept the industrial logic. They could cash out. Like, they've made a lot of money out of this company, but they've also put a lot of time, energy, blood, sweat, and tears into it. And the families make a decision. The Hoffman, etc., they decide to hold.
Yeah, and that decision charges the trajectory of European pharma. Because if Roche had been absorbed into Novartis in the early 2000s, the biotech platform might have been diluted. The diagnostics integration might have been deprioritized. Capital allocation would have been centralized under a different philosophy. Instead, Roche remained independent, but the Novartis overhang lingers for more than a decade. It's not fully resolved until 2014 when Roche repurchases Novartis' stake for approximately $20 billion. This is not a defensive move, this is a declaration.
Yeah, Roche is the independent, and arguably, if they hadn't done this, we probably wouldn't be covering them today. It would be a very different business on that particular aspect. But I think there's, again, in the middle of all this, and just be clear, listeners, like, a competitor has purchased basically as many shares as they can. They face a hostile takeover. During this period, in July 2008, they probably make one of their, if the early chance to buy Genentech in the 90s was definitely a ballsy move, in July 2008, my God, this is really all in thinking, because in the middle of the global financial crisis, they moved to acquire the remaining shares of Genentech, right? They offer $89 per share. The final deal is closed at 95. Total value is 46 billion. They buy the rest of Genentech, and they're including it now in their business.
And this is one of the largest biotech acquisitions in history. The timing was extraordinary. Credit markets freezing. Lehman Brothers will collapse later that year. Most companies are retrenching. Roche is doubling down.
Yeah, and the strategic logic is simple, but expensive. Like, this is a big bill they have to pay. Genentech at this point is not just a research. It's not just a research engine. It is the revenue engine, right? They've got great products like Rituxan, Herceptin, Avastin to come. They're generating multi-billion-dollar revenues. Yeah, oncology is now core to Roche's pharma, but it's also core to Roche's DNA. And arguably, the cancer is the emperor of all maladies, right? This is the most difficult thing that Roche is. This is the enemy that they are here to take on. This is the ascent of modern medicine brought full circle. By bringing Genentech fully inside, Roche captures 100% of the economics and takes 100% of the risk.
Yeah, and I mean, like we discussed a few minutes ago, that many pharmaceutical companies, they are really established long, long time ago. So they had this way of capitalizing their industrial history. But Genentech is essentially proving my earlier statement wrong, because Genentech is not one of those old ones. So actually, by disrupting that old logic, by acquiring Genentech, essentially having this injection of new genetic material into your body, boosts you to the unprecedented performance. So I mean, it just shows the point that you need to know when to benefit from the past and when you need to let go some of that old baggage.
Yeah, and Marty,
And it's so great.
I wouldn't say you're wrong because again, Genentech didn't make it as an enduring company on its own right. It didn't have the balance sheet. It didn't have the distribution. It had the products, right? And it had
Yes.
the research engine, but it couldn't deliver. But it didn't have the diagnostics, so
No, it didn't.
it couldn't do the full job.
Yeah, but it was kind it was the vaccination that injected into the large body of Roche.
Oh, very much so. I think that
So
again, without the kind of Chugai and Genentech culture, and we read a lot of this. I read a lot of this. Roche's culture was starting to fossilize,
yeah,
right? It was starting to consolidate. It was starting to get slow, and actually, the injection of Genentech and Chugai into Roche makes
yeah,
Roche 10 times stronger.
exactly. And that's a beautiful story in this whole Roche history. But I mean, let's see. I mean, the financial risk was enormous. The acquisition is financed through a combination of debt and internal resources. Leverage rises. The question becomes, can the oncology franchise continue to grow fast enough to justify the price?
Yeah, spoiler alert, it does. No, so by 2010s, Roche becomes the world leader in oncology. And its peak, oncology represents 50% of Roche's pharmaceutical revenues. And the blockbusters multiply. Herceptin, Avastin, there's so many, right? They just go on and on, each one generating billions annually. Oncology becomes their big revenue driving engine.
Yeah. And the diagnostics continue to compound. By the 2010s, Roche Diagnostics is the global leader in vitro diagnostics. It becomes essential infrastructure for hospitals and laboratories. And this dual structure, pharma plus diagnostics, proves especially powerful during the COVID-19 pandemic. Roche's diagnostics division becomes one of the world's primary suppliers of PCR testing systems and reagents. Revenue surges temporarily during the pandemic, but the underlying architecture was built decades earlier.
And again, if I'm kind of hypothesizing that Genentech and Chugai are great for Roche, I'm terribly sorry because the pandemic was awful, but the pandemic is brilliant for Roche, right? Because effectively, if it didn't have to move fast before, oh my God, it has to move fast during the pandemic, right? This diagnostics business, and remember, it's Roche that very much kind of develops the PCR technology. They acquire and then develop the PCR technology. They are at that is like everybody went into the pandemic not knowing anything about PCR tests and all this sort of stuff, and we all came out as kind of experts in this side. So this changes the company more than almost anything else because it's a home front diagnostics accelerator. So basically, if we look at the revenue trajectory, Roche's revenues in the 90s are measured in the single digit billions of dollars. By the mid 2000s, they are several times that. By the 10s, they're 50 billion. By the 2020s, they're 60 billion, right? It's not linear growth that we're talking about. This is compounding through platform scaling.
Yeah. And Roche remains capital disciplined thanks to the groundbreaking work from Fritz Gerber, who was the CEO until 1998. And R&D intensity remains high, which was the fundamental idea that the company was originally established with, often around 20% of sales. But it is focused. Roche exits lower return segments, narrows to pharmaceuticals and diagnostics. It doubles down on biologics. It embraces personalized medicine.
And Marty, I want to bring us back to that quote that you started this episode with. So, it's far, the founder of modern medicine or founder of medicine, it's far more important to know what person the disease has than what the disease the person has, right? It's all
Yes.
about knowing the person. And I think by
Yeah.
this stage, Roche has really operationalized that ideal. Herceptin only works for HER2 positive patients. You must test first, then basically treat. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
diagnostic is not ancillary, it is core. This is not a drug company. This is a precision medicine platform at this stage.
Yeah. And I mean, most pharmaceutical companies are portfolios of drugs and their manufacturing and distribution. Roche is a system. It's a system combining research biology, biotech manufacturing, companion diagnostics, and global regulatory capability. Then we can add to that the family backed governance, because I mean, still as of today,
Yep.
the families, which today the Hoffmann Roche family is the richest family in Switzerland, still having a major share and a long term capital allocation. And it defends independence fiercely.
Yeah, we saw through the Novartis episode that governance matters because without voting control, Roche would have been absorbed. Without that concentration of voting stock, it wouldn't have happened. But easily, without independence, you wouldn't. Who does a deal in the middle of the financial crisis where the markets are screaming and the music has stopped? Who does a 46 billion acquisition? Like nobody does that. There's no story. There's no story during the 2008 financial crisis where somebody puts that much money on the table to acquire an asset.
Yeah, but I try to answer your question actually. We can be quite comfortable if we say that if you have somebody who is just running the company as a financial asset, is not going to make that investment. Whoever made those decisions, there was somebody who understood the customers and the market very, very well, and they had a strategic view how Roche can be part of a solution. This is not a financial transaction. It's an enterprise strategic decision that they made.
Yeah, because without Genentech, I would argue they would not dominate oncology.
No,
Sorry,
not at
without
all.
Genentech and Chugai, they're not in that space. And without the commitment to diagnostics, 100 years later than they started, they would not have a precision medicine business, right? It's
So
a
it
different.
seems.
Yeah, it wouldn't be there. It wouldn't be there.
Yeah. Yeah. And today, by when we came to the 20s, Roche is one of the world's largest biotech companies, the global leader in oncology, the global leader in vitro diagnostics, and a company with revenues north of 60 billion annually. Still headquartered in Basel. Production is not in the original places. I mean, essentially, there's a huge change. I mean, the Grenzach area has been abandoned. Actually, the Nutley, New Jersey, is not in use anymore. I mean, it was closed in 2016.
Yeah.
So they have made a huge change, and one of the key elements is that they are very operational in the United States. They have two locations in Switzerland. They are in Singapore, and they have two important diagnostics hubs in Germany. But it's based once again, they are part of acquisitions that they made. So this is very, very big change that has happened in the company, and I can say that this is a story of very successful pivots.
Absolutely. Okay, I think that's a perfect time to kind of end the narrative part of our episode. And now let's change gears, put our analysis hats on. And again, I think it's very important to kind of stand back from the story, stand back from the company's hero's journey, and look at what powers actually sustains Roche. Is it scale? Is it switching costs? Is it brand? What is it? Now, we've repined this part of the show from people who've listened to other episodes because even though we still love Jim Collins, we felt, Martti and I, that we were just repeating ourselves. We were becoming cheerleaders for these businesses, right? And actually, category leadership, we study great companies. They are almost by definition great. So we were not really analysts. We were very much cheerleaders. So this time we're going to analyze Roche through the lens of Hamilton Helmer's 7 powers. right? And if we strip away the personalities, the acquisitions, the wars, the patent cliffs, let's look at what actually sustains Roche. Hamilton-Helmers Powers framework is useful here because it forces us a hard question. Where does the durable excess return come from? Right? It's clearly not innovation alone. It's not size alone. It's not brand alone. So let's walk through it and see where we find. So we start with the first power, again, which is scale economics. So Martti, where are you on this one? Does Roche have scale economics?
Well, originally they didn't have that. I mean, for many years, they were a global player, but the competition was fierce and stronger than they were. And it's clear that scale matters in pharmaceuticals, but they were not the largest. I mean, this is like funding startup companies that when you fund 10 molecules, 8 fail, 1 breaks even, and 1 becomes a multi-billion-dollar franchise. So yes, you need size and you need to have risk tolerance. That's absolutely clear. R&D spending has been dramatically high, roughly 20% of revenues, often 10 to 12 billion annually. It's only possible when you have those blockbusters where the wins are essentially funding your other let's say opportunities. The scale definitely matters in global regulatory infrastructure, manufacturing biologics, which are also capital intensive, global distribution networks, diagnostic instrument installation and servicing. So yes, the scale matters, but I mean that's not their win all strategy. I don't think that they absolutely you need a scale. You need to reach a minimum critical mass. The scale alone is not differentiating. There's got to be more. I mean, the way how they did it matters, not only the scale, because Pfizer has scale, Novartis has scale, Merck has scale. It's not solving everything alone, but you definitely need to be above a certain critical mass in order to be a viable player.
Yeah, again, I think this is one of the reasons why Genentech doesn't make it as an enduring company, is in this blockbuster drug business model, you got to create a drug, right? 1 in 10 doesn't work. Sorry, 1 in 10 works, 9 are dead. So you spend billions basically killing 9 drugs. 1 gets to market, you then sell it for basically 10 years. And then after 10 years, your patent cliff kicks in and you're dead in the water. Right? So you've got to have scale to be able to do the drug discovery part, the trials part, the get it to market part with a brand that people will buy, and 9 products don't work. Right? It's if you don't have scale, you're kind of dead in a ditch. And I think that's where Genentech and others didn't have escape velocity. They didn't have enough scale. They couldn't get it to market, and the economics basically bit them in the ass.
Yeah.
Okay.
Agreed.
All right. Okay. So that's scale economics. Now let's look at this next power. What about switching costs? So here I would say this is where they've got a great advantage, right? Because through their diagnostics business, if this is a razor and blades model for me, right? You know, you have these machines, they sit in the hospital. The hospital lab uses a Roche machine. They're going to use the same machine for 10 years. They're going to use a Roche test in the Roche machine because nothing else works. That's going to lead you to a particular diagnosis for a particular type of patient. Then you sell them a Roche drug. And the switching costs, let's imagine there's a test comes out that doesn't run on a Roche machine. Am I going to suddenly tear out all my Roche printers just because I want to be able to run this test with another machine? I'm a hospital. I'm not going to do that. That's a big barrier to entry.
Yeah. That's absolutely. And I can tell you another example. In electronics, you are the one of the household brands is Fluke, an American manufacturer. The Fluke 77 and Fluke 87 multimeters are still produced today. They are filthy expensive compared to the competition. They are not particularly versatile in having the latest and the greatest things. The reason why they are produced today is that they have so many customers who have optimized their processes in a way where you are using Fluke 77 to measure certain parameters. So rather than introducing new multimeters, you want to use the one that is behaving predictably. It doesn't have to be more accurate than something else, as long as it's producing the the result that keeps your own production constant.
Yeah, this is about workflows. I totally
It's
agree.
workflow, and if it works, don't fix it. I mean, good old American saying. And of course, this is then creating recurring revenues through reagents, service contracts, upgrades. The economics resemble the good old razor and blade model,
Yeah,
but in a regulated mission critical context. Diagnostic switching costs are likely Roche's single most unappreciated power. And importantly, they reinforce pharma because diagnostics creates clinical presence and trust.
100%. I think this one's the clear one. I think Roche definitely has very high switching costs. That is a power for them. Okay, let's move on. So, network economies. So, if people are not familiar, this is kind of Visa or Facebook. You come onto the platform because other people come onto the platform and it benefits you as the platform grows. So, yeah, I'm not sure here. Like, I don't take a drug. A drug doesn't become more effective because more people take it, right? Diagnostics is, I don't know. I don't think there's anything here that really is a strong argument for network economics. Like Roche does aggregate patient data, biomarker validation data sets. They've got a lot more evidence, but I'm not sure it's a network effect in the
Yeah,
truest like Visa meta sense.
yeah, I'm not sure either. But I wanna raise one point that is emphasizing that there may be something to it. Genetic engineering is part of the let's say the biotech industry, and that's clearly something that if you have access to large databases of genetical data, that creates you a scale of understanding and probably gives you the more data you have, the more you have, let's say, playing field to
Okay.
experiment with new and revolutionary remedies or changes. So I think there is something to it, but whether this is critical, whether this is groundbreaking, like what you have with some of these platforms, I don't know. But
Yeah,
but clearly
maybe that's more like cornered power, sorry, cornered resource. It's something that someone else doesn't have, or even a process power, right?
yeah,
In the way that you do something.
yeah, could be.
Yeah, it maybe fits under one of the other things. Okay, let's skip forward. So effectively, network economics we're kind of saying no or weak. Counter positioning, like this is Roche from day one, isn't it?
Yeah, this is subtle but powerful. Counterpositioning means adopting a business model incumbents cannot easily replicate because doing so would hurt themselves. Roche's pivot to precision medicine is a classic case, and they have abandoned a lot of the history that we spent today. We spend a lot of time talking about the history, and I think the history is fascinating. But for Roche to become what they today are, they have been able to leave a lot of the history back. Most pharmaceutical companies could talk about personalized medicine but didn't make the commitment to own it. But Roche owned diagnostics. To truly pair drug plus diagnostic, you must coordinate regulatory strategy, trial design, and commercial deployment. If a pure play pharma company wanted to do this, they would need to partner or acquire diagnostics capability from somewhere. That is expensive and culturally difficult. Roche could execute it internally.
Yeah. Like, this just reminds me of AI, and I don't. Let me explain. So when I set up my own business, we talked about doing AI, and this was 2013 to 2019 when I ran that company. But if we were doing machine learning, right, and if you looked under the hood, it was AI-ish, but not AI like we think today, large language models or even large quantitative models. I think this is when pharma companies talk about personalized medicine in air quotes. That's like me talking about AI in 2013, right? They didn't really mean it. Right? They hadn't prepared to truly rip up their whole business and basically restructure it on the new transformational technology. And I think with Roche, what they do here is they don't rip up the existing business. They create a new diagnostics business, right? They actually pay the bill to basically get the capability, and that positions them better than anybody else in the sector. I think that's where they win.
Yeah. So the next one, branding. Let's say something about branding. It's probably moderate, but in a B2B trust context. And this is also interesting because early on in the process, I think it was already during Fritz Hoffman's time, when they were really seriously considering getting to the consumer market, but very quickly found out that that's also an area where you can burn your fingers. And as a result, Roche has not become a consumer brand. Patients rarely ask for Roche, even if, of course, I mean, you can see whenever you are buying your medicine, you can find the Hexagon
Yeah.
brand there. But early on, already Fritz Hoffmann knew that you need to deal with hospitals, oncologists, doctors, the professionals, pharmacists, and they definitely trust Roche. In oncology, especially, brand means clinical credibility, trial rigor, manufacturing reliability, regulatory experience. And I must say, it asks me to go back to the late 60s, early 70s, when this was really hurt. This was really hurt because there were many things, and we don't have time to go through all of those. But there were many conflicts where the brand name was actually deteriorating,
Yeah.
and the very successful recovery, where a critical part was that they became much more transparent with everything that they did, including whenever they had some problems, they were first ones to admit that. Has over the years after the 70s, the past 50 years has really brought them to a point where the brand in the right context means something positive. And the diagnostics only amplifies this. If your lab platform and your therapy provider are the same company, trust compounds. Brand in pharma is not emotional, it is institutional, and Roche has definitely institutionalized the trust.
Yeah, look, I completely agree. I think Roche has brand power on a B2B context. Like hospitals buy Roche because of the capability, because of the brand, because of the trust. And as we found out during our research, when I talked to Joe Public about Roche, they were like, they do drugs, kinda, right? They didn't
Mm.
know. Joe Public doesn't really know Roche, really doesn't know. I think hospitals know Roche.
Mm.
Labs know Roche, and I think that's the brand power. But I think brand on its own, like again with the strictest Hamilton Helmers definition, will people be prepared to pay more because of Roche? Yeah, I think so. Just.
They in the best case they love the brand name or the specific drug
Yep.
that you are asking for from your physician. It's much more important that you ask for the Valium or whatever you are buying. When we talk about a prescription drug, you ask for the drug, not the pharmaceutical company.
Exactly. Yep. Very much so. Okay. Next, cornered resource. So, cornered resource under Hamilton Helmer's definition typically means control of something that's scarce. Yeah. For Roche, I would say this is much more around the system that they've created. It's not about the patients. It's not really about the drugs. It's Genentech. It's Chugai. It's the diagnostic installed base of tests. It's the oncology regulatory experience. And it's the kind of long-term family governance structure. It's the system that is the resource, the cornered resource, in the same way that TSMC has a system, right? The way that they do things is actually not very replicable. Even moving it from Taiwan to Arizona is not easy to do. Yield goes down. I
Mm.
think Roche is like that. I think that their corner resource, their scarce asset, is actually themselves.
And I mean, I mean, we could say this very simply, and this is the same as with ASML. Strong commitment to science and technology. So it's not about sales, it's about science and technology. So that whatever you say, your promise has a background that you can defend and you can deliver the promise that you give your end user customers.
Well said. Well said. Okay, then what about process power? Where do they stand on that? And again, it's difficult because cornered resource and process power often get confused, because obviously they're two very aligned powers.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, one of the things that I didn't quite that much like in the research was that for decades, they were very functionally organized, and only in the, let's say, in big time in the 90s, late 80s, and in the they then started to have divisions, so that you give, I mean, essentially a strategic business unit model or division model in the management of the company. So there was a huge change there. But altogether, they are all through the process. They have been committed to have very well functioning industrial and commercial processes. We've said many times already about the sustained R&D intensity across all these decades. Very disciplined capital allocation, willingness to exit non-core businesses, ability to integrate biotech without destroying culture, ability to coordinate diagnostics and pharma trial design. So definitely, I think this is what they've done, and especially starting from the, let's say, I would say from the 80s, there was a clear pivot
Yep.
point where this was emphasized way more than before.
No, very much agreed. Okay, so then if we were going to kind of sum up on kind of process power, I think if you wrap in the family control, which very much has insulated them from kind of hostile takeovers, and then we look at effectively the powers that Roche has. So we were kind of strong on switching costs. We were strong on counter positioning each time they've kind of killed their darlings. They're very good in terms of cornered resource. They've created that for themselves, which allows this successful allocation. That's kind of where Roche sits. Like, it's got scale, it's got cornered resource, it's got switching powers, and it's got some counter positioning skills. We know it's a great company. It's clearly got those powers in spades. And again, I think, you know, when I look at Roche, I'm thinking about they've built a system now. This is a cumulative effort. Now they've built a system that identifies the right patient, delivers the right biologic, supports it with a diagnostic infrastructure, and then reinvests relentlessly into that next generation. This is a hungry company that wants to go forward. Right, and like Leonardo da Vecchio, Luxottica founder, only look forward, only look upwards, right? So again, before we get to the quintessence, there were some things in the Roche story where you could say, did they get it wrong? Right, like, is there a counterfactual? And the one area that I did come back to the issue with GLPs, right? You've seen Eli Lilly. And again, I'm not trying to suffer from recency bias, but you've seen Novo Nordisk and you've seen Eli Lilly, who've both been on the we need to produce insulin mission, because it's a total mission, for over 100 years, right? They have made the breakthrough into GLPs, and kind of Roche is missing in action. They're busy with oncology. Maybe you can't do both. Martti, what did you think about their recent acquisition, of Comet Therapeutics? Because that was them. Looks like they're kind of buying into the GLP-1 race, kind of like at the 98th percentile, rather than starting 100 years ago.
Yeah, and this is interesting because the diabetes and obesity, metabolic disease medicines, they have been kind of on and off their agenda over the decades a few times. But anyway, Comet Therapeutics is a Berkeley-based biotech-focused company focused on metabolic disease, particularly obesity and diabetes. At the time when GLP-1 drugs were reshaping the pharmaceutical industry, it had raised several $100 million from venture investors and developed a discovery platform aimed at producing differentiated incretin therapies. Its core scientific focus was on GLP-1 and GIP biology, the same hormonal pathways targeted by Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly's blockbuster weight loss drugs, but with attempts to improve efficacy, tolerability, and delivery. In December 23, Roche acquired Carmot for $2.7 billion upfront, with additional milestone payments bringing the total potential value to just over $3 billion. The key asset was a CT3, a dual GLB-1/GIP agonist in mid-stage development, along with CT996, an oral GLP-1 candidate, and other earlier metabolic programs. The acquisition marked Roche's formal entry into the obesity space, a therapeutic area it had largely missed while Novo and Lilly built dominant positions. Since the acquisition closed in 2024, Roche has advanced seat into larger clinical trials, reporting competitive mid-stage weight loss data that puts it within range of existing market leaders. The oral GLP-1 candidate has also shown early positive signals. At the same time, Roche has demonstrated portfolio discipline by discontinuing weaker companion assets, indicating that this is not a passive pipeline acquisition, but an actively managed strategic push into metabolic disease. Strategically, the Carmot deal is Roche attempting to build a new growth engine outside oncology and diagnostics, particularly as biosimilar erosion and post-COVID normalization have pressured parts of its core business. The success of this move now hinges on whether Roche can differentiate its GLP-1 platform in late-stage trials and compete in a mass-market primary care-driven category, a very different battlefield from its traditional precision oncology stronghold.
So, again, when I think about this, I think this doesn't feel like Roche. The Roche that we've kind of got to know over the last month. It kind of feels a little bit lastminute.com, right? And it kind of feels like not we made the wrong decision to not do GLP-1s, but we made the decision, the positive decision to do oncology. But we're now feeling that we've kind of slightly missed a boat. And this feels like a late game, basically try and get into the race. And I know, for some reason, for me, this doesn't feel like Roche.
Yeah, well, I mean, you are right. But on the other hand, if we think about the Genentech acquisition, if you would ask from Emil Barrel if it was possible, because of course he's passed years back, I mean that didn't sound like the Roche of 1950s.
Okay.
So I mean I'm not overly critical for Roche attempting to build a new growth engine outside oncology and diagnostics. Whether they have something genuinely unique to contribute is something that I don't know.
Yeah,
but of course it is clear that if they are just trying to replicate the stuff that the competitors are already replicating in large quantities, then it's not a leading edge position.
Yeah, because
but on the other hand,
feels
without
like
knowing,
yeah, because it feels like you're going back to mass market. It feels like back to Valium, right? GLP-1s, no disrespect, is very much.
But I mean it's
very much a sell to kind of the consumer drug. I want to lose weight.
But I mean it's not about the weight loss as such. It's a segment of pharmaceuticals that are representing a huge opportunity. I mean it's a huge business market at the moment, and for them having a sneak peek into that and seeing whether they can contribute something unique, then if they can contribute something unique, then it's worthwhile. If they are just replicating and copying the stuff that their competitors are already doing, then it's probably not a great effort.
Okay.
But I'm not too critical at the moment.
Okay.
Before seeing what happens.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so we'll do a bit of future forecasting. That's one to watch.
Yeah.
Now let's talk China for a second. So we didn't touch on this really in the other part of the episode because it didn't fit neatly into the history part. Look, Roche is facing some pretty severe headwinds in China based around, if listeners are not familiar, China introduced basically this volume-based procurement, VBP, program, which is state-led bulk purchasing and pricing reform. It was piloted in 2018 and expanded nationally across drug categories in subsequent years. Okay, and what it does is it guarantees hospital volumes, but you gotta drop the price big time, right? And often exceeding 50% reductions on reimbursed drug costs. So VPP, so volume-based procurement, now runs in multiple phases each year. The 9th round was in late 2023, and the 11th round has just been completed mid-2025, and it applies to dozens of products. Now, basically, this has it has dramatically reduced Roche's sales in China. So the first quarter 2025 sales worth 4 billion. Yeah, so basically 4 billion Swiss francs. But China revenues in that quarter fell 23%. So revenues in China went down big time. This feels like losing the German market in World War One or losing the Russian market at the after the Russian Revolution. Marty, what are we thinking about the China headwinds? Is this a market that Roche can still perform strongly in?
I mean, if you are dealing with pharmaceuticals that have become commodities, I mean, we don't have to be in pharmaceutical business in understanding to understand what commodities mean. It doesn't matter even if you sell the aircraft structures or you produce anything where there's no strategic reason why the customer needs to buy from you and you alone. You are in a competitive scale, and when we talk about products like pharmaceuticals that are produced in high scale, I mean, even it's clear here that if we ask from Philip Kotler and his marketing management book, we know that in the commodity phase there are certain competitive factors that will be dominating. So the question is that exactly like in the early part of Roche history, they were very much perfecting the production engine in order to be competitive in the marketplace. I think this is a simple question. I mean, if you are dealing with commodities, you need to have a production engine that is able to produce in low cost, in high scale, especially when you have large customers like the government of China.
Yep.
I mean, it's a simple question, and it happens everywhere if you are dealing with commodities. And I'm of course not the one to give any advice to Roche here, but if you are in the commodity market, then your production and efficiency is very, very important. If you are able to produce medicines and other solutions that are unique for you, so that you have another competitive edge that is bringing the customer back to you, more power to you. But if you're in the commodity business, then price is definitely something that the customer will be absolutely interested in reducing as much as possible. And having been an Airbus supplier in the aerostructures, I tell you, whenever there are several customers, several potential suppliers, the customer will be brutal in getting the lowest possible price that still fulfills all the specific requirements.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on from China. We'll watch that space with interest. Last, listeners, we're just going to finish off. There was a COVID slump, Marty, right? And I think this does need explaining because this came up a lot in the research. The COVID slump, so this is post-COVID, basically wasn't your classic tech slump. Meta reduced some jobs, Microsoft reduced some jobs because they kind of brought forward a lot of engineering and capacity because of the world kind of was online a lot during the pandemic. Roche, in this case, deserves great credit for their contribution to ending the pandemic. They scaled up their diagnostic business insanely and they made good money out of it, but they very much came to the rescue of the world in terms of diagnostic scale. Obviously, post COVID, basically the number of diagnostic tests basically falls off a cliff. So we see a dramatic reduction here. We do see some jobs restructuring. People went into different divisions, but I think it's a different type of restructuring and reduction that we saw in tech. This was a real hero's moment scale up. Yeah. And they had to then go down the other side of the curve. And that was just completely understandable.
Yeah. And this very much sounds like our favorite industrial domain, defense industry.
Of course.
I mean, it's your ability as a supplier to ramp up and ramp down production in a business environment where the customer demand is not going to be constant. How do you do that? It's exactly the same problem as you have with fighter aircraft or complex weapon systems. Whenever the customer is not buying from you, they anxiously paying you extra for keeping production capacity that is not needed. But whenever the need is there, they are tormenting you because you are not ramping up quickly enough. Happens over and over again and will happen in the future. The key question, and once again, I'm not qualified to advise Roche on this. I think this is a process competence. How you have organized your production, and are you able to organize your production in such a way that you can have, for example, industrial capacity available in your machinery in such a way that if you need to take a third shift, for example, into use, do you have mechanisms how you can train people who are not from your company, who are not necessarily even from your specific pharmaceutical industry? Can you train them to help ramping up the production in your production machine? And what do you do with them when when demand is getting lower? This is a management of your industrial assets. It's a management of your workforce. I mean, these production facilities are extremely complex and delicate. You don't invest in a month or two to build new capacity. But all I can say is that whenever these national security catastrophes are facing us, nobody's able to respond 100%. But when the competition is there, the ones who can do best will be most successful. And I must raise the story of Premix, a Finnish company that is producing the conductive plastics used in this diagnostic equipment as the raw material for the pipettes used in the in vitro diagnostics. They were able to deliver during the COVID pandemic. And whenever there was a customer, the Department of Health and Human Services in the United States, who was asking more and asking more and asking more, Premix always responded, yes, we can deliver. And as a result, long story short, based on the performance that they demonstrated during the pandemic, they had very, very handsome funding from the US government to build a factory producing this conductive plastic in the United States. And the factory is up and running in North Carolina. Why? Because they had found a way how to ramp up when the customers are asking more.
I couldn't agree more. And again, I've told you the story of my friend Timothy and his company in the States, and how again they developed the lyophilized, so freeze-driven products during COVID, basically, and they just kept saying yes. And automating production, and they just ramped up and they produced the ingredients. I think they went into something like 300 million COVID tests, like an insane number. But again, if we hadn't brought testing to that scale that quickly, while there was a race for vaccines, we wouldn't have brought the pandemic under control. Okay, so
but and I mean, in a summary, if you're, I mean, for any company that has a role in the national security scenarios, and even pandemics are a national security scenario, if you find a way how you can quickly ramp up, more power to you.
Absolutely.
But it's totally dependent on the thing, and in some cases it's impossible. If you are able to get the end user customers to pay something in advance, great. It's not a simple question. But when the catastrophe starts, the ones that are best prepared will be the ones that will reap all the benefits.
Amen to that. Okay, so let's leave COVID behind, hopefully for good. Martti, let's finish off with the quintessence, right? So in my head, listeners, this is what I can't stop thinking about in this kind of months-long study of Roche. So again, this is what I get down to. I think Roche doesn't win by curing disease. It fundamentally wins by deciding what disease is, right? And as you've heard on this journey, disease changes over time. In 1890s, disease was an infection. It was tuberculosis, etc. And you treated that disease to the best of your ability. And then in the 1930s, disease is a deficiency. It's malnutrition and rickets. You got vitamin C. And you supplemented the disease. Vitamins are supplements. In the 90s, disease becomes mood. It's anxiety, stress, depression. And you kind of tranquilize the disease. You kind of dealt with it that way. And then in 1990s, this is the switch. Disease becomes molecular. That's where I am in my head. Like Roche names the disease. That's what
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah, and I mean, cancer is no longer just breast cancer. It was HER2 positive breast cancer. It was B-cell lymphoma expressing CD20. I mean, this is very scientific.
Yeah.
It's just a much more detailed categorization of the specific case that you are facing with your patient. A tumor with a specific receptor profile. The disease has no longer the headline. The patient biology has. And actually, when you look at the amount of stuff that we know about human being, there are many areas where we have a lot more to learn on how human biology actually works. And this is the inflection point where Roche has positioned itself very well, not by inventing precision medicine alone, but by building the infrastructure to execute it. Diagnostics plus biologics, that we've said several times. Test plus therapy. Platform plus discipline.
And I think the key for me is, and it's going to sound very disparaging to the other companies, so I don't mean to be, but I think most pharmaceutical companies, particularly those that have come out of the US, they chase molecules. Roche built a system, right? That to me is the difference, right? A lot of what I saw in the stats, the advertising of big pharma on the US, it's very much about packaged medicines. Roche has built a system. It's R&D at scale. It's Genentech and Chugai with their, scientific autonomy. It's a diagnostic structure to actually help you, not just sell you something, actually help you. And then it's got its long-term governance decision making. And then it's got the discipline to exit businesses when they're not essential to it. It's cutting out the bits of itself that it doesn't need. Most businesses don't do that, right? That's not luck, that is design. Roche has built a system, a kind of self-improving system over time.
Yeah, so what is Roche? It's a precision medicine platform anchored by diagnostics and reinforced by process power. Its advantage is not one molecule, it's the ability to repeatedly produce the next one and match it to the right patient.
Okay, so I think we should end on this. It is far more important to know what person the disease has than what disease the person has, right? Hippocrates was right? Roche has operationalized that at industrial scale. So, Martti, we finished in Switzerland. The mountains were lovely. The Basel River was fast flowing. But it's time to pack our metaphorical bags and move on our European adventure. And now let's go from the second most mountainous country in Europe to, Denmark, one of the flattest.
Yeah, but with a core difference. The country we go next has direct access to the oceans, whereas Switzerland doesn't.
I see where you're going with that one. So, listeners, next month's category leaders is the giant of global shipping, a non-controversial topic at this point in time in 2026, Maersk. Maersk today generates roughly 54 billion in annual revenue, operates 670 container ships, zooming around the world, has the capacity to carry about 4.5 million containers at sea, very big numbers. And this represents about 14, maybe 15% of global container shipping capacity. And if you want a stat to stick in your head, 1 in every 7 containers shipped on this planet is by Maersk. But the ships really aren't the real story for this company.
Exactly. Because the surprising thing about Maersk today that it's no longer trying to be the world's best shipping company. It's trying to become the end-to-end infrastructure of global trade. As you know, historically shipping companies did one thing, moved containers from port to port. Everything else, trucking, warehousing, customs, logistics coordination, was fragmented across thousands of companies. Maersk's strategy over the last decade has been to collapse that fragmentation. Factory gate, truck, port, ship, port, rail, warehouse, retailer. One system. Which of course makes a whole lot of things. I mean, if you've ever tried to ship anything, the complexity of the
So
shipping
hard.
industry for a layman, it's nightmarish. If somebody is willing to take the door-to-door value chain into capable hands, I'm all in.
And I think this is fascinating. And again, Marty and I enjoy these month-long deep dives onto these companies. I can't wait to I loved our journey in modern medicine. I can't wait to get started on global shipping because I find it fascinating. It's this super complicated maths problem that also involves countries and borders and territories and international waters and shipping. And then you have the containers themselves and the pre-shipping container stage, and the whole thing. I'm ready to jump in immediately. But Marty, this whole sector's consolidated as well. It's a different beast. We're going to tell the story from 1900s, but we could start this story with the East Indian Company.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, it used to be very fragmented. Today, there are 3 companies that are controlling close to half of global capacity, and it's of course, as we know today, it's become also geopolitically very, very sensitive. It's an absolutely interesting part. Not only for Finland, for many, many other nations. The great majority of all the incoming and outgoing logistics from Finland, more than 90%, are by sea.
Yeah, we are an island.
So we are on an island, like are so many others. Even if they don't look like islands, they look like continents, but in the logistics sense, they are islands.
Absolutely. So listeners, join us next month, where Marty and I tell the story of Maersk, a fascinating category leader, because if companies like Roche helped humanity understand disease inside the body, Maersk is going to help us understand how the global economy actually moves. So, join us next month. Thank you so much for listening, and please give us that feedback that we asked for right at the beginning. We are setting the bar very high on these episodes. We want your input. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much.